up will be likely sometime in September or early October. It will be a case study with designation. It's funny, designation just came out with a press release saying that they were being purchased by a New York boot camp of sorts. So, but we've worked with designation since the beginning of the year to incorporate accessibility into their curriculum. And the accessibility camp is the results of that. So they're going to be doing a case study on what it was like not knowing anything about accessibility and then incorporating it into their curriculum. So look for the announcement on that meetup soon. We have a web accessibility class coming up by Girls Develop It. When I was told about this, I was so excited. Because a lot of people do wish to learn more about web accessibility in a formal format, in a class-type format. They're offering a web accessibility class on Saturday, October 6th, from 10 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. If you'd like to learn more information, see Margie right here. She can answer any questions you have. Go up to their meetup site at meetup.com/girl-develop-it-chicago-il. Yes? Scholarships are available. So definitely look into it. Ask questions if you're really interested. Oh, let's try this again. Okay, there's actually 3 webinars coming up. Let me go through these quickly. Including people with disabilities in design. That's coming up this Thursday at 11 a.m. That is being given by the PACEAO group. I am an employee of the PACEAO group. If you would like to sign up for that, go to goo.gl/capital P, lowercase nzw, capital Z 9. Another one is Intro to TalkBack and Android Accessibility. This is being given by DQ. It's going to be on September 18th at 12 noon. Go to goo.gl/2 capital Y, lowercase v, Q, B, capital V. And lastly, the 2018 Digital Accessibility Trends Fall Update given by Level Access. That will be on September 13th at 1 p.m. If you'd like to register for that, go to goo.gl/8H, capital H, lowercase z, 2, capitalized M8. Okay, how many people here know what Accessibility Camp Chicago is? Raise your hands. Okay, how many of those same people have registered? Registration ends this Thursday. So if you are interested in attending, go to a11ycampchi.org and register by end of day on Thursday. One day, one track, 7 talks. The talks have been given by Liz Davis, who's a member of this meetup. Billy Gregory, coming all the way from Toronto, Canada, to do his sucks talk. You'll have to go to the website to find out more on that. But it's special, trust me. Jeanette Washington, she's coming all the way from Detroit, Michigan to give a talk. We also have John Gunderson from the University of Illinois giving a talk on ARIA. Molly Lee talking about design. Melanie Sumner, a local Ember organizer and contributor. She's going to be doing a talk on development and accessibility. And this thing's very sensitive today. And Charlene King is going to talk about getting the organization to acknowledge and embrace accessibility. So definitely want to register now if you're interested. We also need volunteers, especially from this meetup. So if you're interested in volunteering, you get in for free. So you see here, this is, you can save about 25 bucks if you volunteer. But the submissions end at the end of the day today. So once I get off the train, submissions stop. But go to the website, 811chi.org/become-a-volunteer. Twitter, if you are a Twitter head, like myself, please use the hashtag 811chi for any nuggets of information, photos, if you share photos online, definitely use that hashtag. And with that, I have prepared a slightly special intro. As we were working on this, I'm actually captioning last year's event where Derek spoke. Believe it or not, it took me that long. But I was reminded of something, and I felt I had to do this. There we go. See if I can keep up with this. Episode 3. This is the third year he's spoken. Digging into inclusive design. Derek Featherstone is an internationally known speaker and authority on accessibility and inclusive design. He's been working on the web since 1999, starting as a web developer. He migrated the field of accessibility and quickly discovered the need to move the thinking of accessibility and inclusion. Oh, wow. Derek lives in Ottawa, Canada, with his wife and their 4 children. He's also a fitness instructor and 3-time Ironman triathlon finisher. Ladies and gentlemen, give a warm Chicago welcome to Derek Featherstone. I should have known I was never going to keep up with that. And then this is the stream.
That was an incredible build-up. I don't quite know how to follow that. Wow, cool. Hi. Seeing all these faces that I know is really cool. That's one of the things that, you know, when Dennis said, like, hey, would you come back when you're going to be speaking in Chicago? Would you come back again? I'm like, dude, of course. Like, this is a good place for me. I like being here. I also really enjoy kind of just coming and talking about things that I'm thinking about. And, you know, we're like, this is an accessibility and inclusion thing. So people like don't judge me for having bad ideas. And I like that at times in my life. So I'm gonna share a bunch of things with you. I'm excited to be here. I'm Feather on to start with. See if I don't have the range on my clicker because or it could just be, there it is. If you want to get in touch with me afterwards, or well, probably not before or like during, but after we're done, Feather on Twitter. I'm Derek.Featherstone at levelaccess.com. And that's still a little bit weird to say. A year ago, I stood here and I was showing a completely different logo up here because I worked at a company called Simply Accessible. And in February of this year, we got acquired by Level Access. So that's kind of new still, even though it's been 6 months. And the one thing that I'm really kind of excited about is that the world is kind of seeing that like accessibility specialists are like something that is worth having and acquiring. That was like really kind of a neat feeling for me, and probably for a lot of the other people that have been involved as well. And there's many little accessibility consultancies that are being acquired and working for larger companies now. And so that's kind of an interesting thing that's happening in the space. So to say that a lot has changed in a year, that means a lot of things on a lot of different levels. In particular, a lot has changed in the world of inclusive design and the world that we're in terms of accessibility. And it feels like, you know, like maybe things haven't changed that much, but there's actually quite a bit that has changed. And one of the things that I have really struggled with over the last year is understanding what inclusive design even means. So many of us have been in the accessibility space for years and years and years and years, and literally for like 15 to 20 years. And inclusive design has always been a thing that we have talked about and understood as like very closely related to accessibility, and it's been part of how we achieve that outcome of accessibility. And one of the things that we have seen over the last year is this incredible growth and broadening of what we mean by inclusive design. So if you talk to anybody about inclusive design right now, what we're starting to see is people realizing or making connections that this is not just an accessibility thing. This is not just a thing where we're talking about people with disabilities anymore. So we have many different lenses about what inclusive design actually means. And if you take a look at, there's a number of books out there, and there's lots of people that are talking about inclusive design, and they mean other things. They're talking about inclusive design as being gender and gender identity inclusive, and being racial and cultural and ethnicity inclusive. And we're talking about things like age inclusive. There are teams out there and individuals out there that have been doing inclusive design in a lot of different ways over the last year, multiple years, and have been doing it very well. But what we're starting to see, and what I have started to see, and what you may be starting to see, is that inclusive design is now becoming broader, but it's actually at a point where we're seeing discussions about inclusive design happen where people with disabilities are also not included. It's now broadening, and everybody is taking it to mean something else other than what we in the accessibility industry have known it to be for years and years and years. So one of the challenges that we face is understanding how do we, like, it feels like we need to kind of have some of those ground level conversations again, because diversity and inclusion initiatives at all kinds of organizations mean a whole lot of different things than what they meant 10 years ago. Does that make sense? I'm not just talking crazy talk, right? That's actually a thing. We are finding that people with disabilities are now being excluded from inclusive design conversations. It's happening. And so we, I think as a group, and I'm just going to assume that we're all kind of in the same camp here, in the same part of the same tribe, in that we all believe that things need to be made accessible. We all know that inclusive design is a mechanism or a process that we can use to get there. It's not the only way that we get there, but it is definitely one of the best ways to get there. And I'm assuming that we're all in the same general kind of tribe in terms of that we believe that that's an important thing. So we need to be prepared for that. We need to be prepared when the diversity and inclusion questions or discussions happen, that we need to be right there front and center, being ready to say, yes, and let's make sure that we're including people with disabilities as well. The question of what inclusive design even means is coming around again and again and again. So be prepared for that. I hear a lot of people say things to me like this, and we have discussions with companies, and they're like saying things like, well, we aren't excluding people intentionally. I'm like, you are right, but you're also not including them intentionally either, right? We need to really focus on intentional inclusion. Now, I've struggled with this whole broadening concept. Like everything is, everything is inclusive design now, because we're dealing with, who are we going to include? Well, obviously everybody. But the particular I want to put on it, because what we kind of share here is the lens of ability, disability, people with disabilities. That is my lens, and I will always look at it through that lens. I will understand and acknowledge, yes, there are other meanings and other lenses that contribute to overall to what inclusive design is. But we need everybody else to acknowledge that people with disabilities and understanding disability ability as it relates to web accessibility is a really big, important thing that we just absolutely have to do. So I think we're probably all on the same page with that, but you will probably find lots of people out there that aren't. I've really struggled with that reconciliation. Like, I was like getting upset. Like, inclusive design is a thing we've been practicing for years, and now it's like meaning this other thing, and we're being forgotten again. And I was getting really upset about it. But when I started to think about the concept of just, these are all just different lenses, right? They're all different lenses. It's all inclusion and diversity. Once I started to reconcile that in my own head, that this is all about different lenses and applying different lenses at different times, I felt much better about it. So I know that I will continue down the path that leads to kind of web accessibility through inclusive design. What I'm hoping that other people will do is they will look at it and they will say, well, inclusive design means this for me. And so they practice that, 5 days a week, 365, whatever number of weeks they actually work. I skipped the weeks there because I wasn't sure how much people are actually working. So 75 weeks a year, we are working on accessibility and inclusive design. So the lens that somebody else is putting on inclusive design might be gender and gender identity, right? It might be race, culture, ethnicity. It might be age. It might be whatever it is. If they're doing that 100% of the time, what I'm hoping that they will do is the next time, like 1 week, they focus on ability and disability as it relates to accessibility. And then the next quarter, they actually focus on it 2 weeks out of that quarter. I am completely in line and hopeful for baby steps. As organizations out there that are like, entrenched in our ways of working, I will take one tiny little baby step that moves in the right direction over massive sweeping change any day. Because massive sweeping change, even though we need it, it takes a tremendous amount of effort and momentum to just get, like, literally, very cliche, but to get that ball rolling, right? But if we can get a small little bit of momentum, one little step, take that step. And so all I'm asking is things like this. So you've got, however many sprints you have in a year, let's make the focus accessibility for like one sprint in this next quarter, a dedicated accessibility sprint, anything, right? I will take that one step and help people to take that one step, because once they realize they take that one step, that they can do it and they can succeed, they will continue, right? They will continue. People also ask me this question, and I tweeted about this, I think, about a month ago, but people ask me, like, should accessibility and inclusive design be its own thing, or should it just be built into everything else? I'm like, and people are like, they're tweeting at me like, it should be its own thing. It should be part of everything. I'm like, stop talking about or. This is an and scenario. Accessibility and inclusion is a thing that must be on its own as a dedicated topic, but it also needs to be part of everything. That's the only way that this really works, right? Has to be part of its own thing, its own dedicated specialists, its own dedicated mindset, philosophies, whatever it is, but it also has to be built into everything else. So these are all the kind of the things that swirl around in my mind. And so I'm very, very comfortable now with the lens idea, because even though it really bugged me at the beginning that like inclusive design is this other thing now, I'm actually much more comfortable with it, knowing that it's different lenses that people can put on at different times. I know that I need to broaden my views on inclusive design, right? Like that's straight out, that is how it is. I have been in the accessibility world, in the industry for like 16 years or whatever number it is. And so my bias for looking at inclusion as a thing with disabilities is a bias that I need to kind of acknowledge and understand so that I can include other things in there. Because I'm not completely ignorant of them, but I certainly don't bring them into my work the same way that I do people with disabilities. And that's something that we all need to, I think, need to acknowledge and be prepared for and ready for. Does that make sense too? When I say things, sometimes I'm like, I'm going to go down this road, and I think it makes sense, but the audience will tell me. If I see like all kinds of puzzled faces, then I know that I need to rewind a little bit. Can't rewind in a live talk though, so we're going to go with this. So all that hopefully makes sense so far. This concept of different lenses. Now, what I've also seen over the last year, and I think I might have even used some of these slides 2 years ago when I was here, when I was talking about inclusive design and and how people are approaching it and who's doing it really well. This is an article from 2016 from Fast Company, Co-Design, Microsoft's radical bet on a new type of design thinking. This was one of those headlines that frustrated me because I was like, this is not new. This is 2016. This is not new. We have been doing this for a long time, right? But we started to see a lot more about inclusive design and accessibility in kind of like the popular media. And so this was a big thing. This is really an interesting article. This is August de los Reyes, who has worked at Microsoft, and he's also been at Pinterest, and he's now at Google. Wonderful guy. I met him long time ago, I think in 2007 or 2008, speaking at a conference. And the next time I saw him, you know, I'd kept up with him online. He and I were both kind of walking around the conference, and we sat down on a cushion and we talked for, I don't know, it must have been at least a half an hour. Really smart guy. And then, you know, I kept in touch with him online. And then the next thing I know, in 2000, whatever it was, I see a video with him, and he's now in a wheelchair because he broke his back falling out of bed. There's a whole bunch of stuff that kind of goes into that, but it's like in the blink of an eye, things really can change. So this interesting to see him and the things that he is doing from an inclusive design perspective, and he's taking that with him on his journey through working at different places now. This was also from 2016, how designing for disabled people is giving Google an edge. This is one of the interesting ones to me as well. I think if you even read the headline, there's a tone in the headlines that is changing. So how designing for disabled people is giving Google an edge. Totally get it. Google's Eve Anderson tells Co-Design how today's accessibility problems could lead to improvements in robots, Google Maps, and even YouTubes. I said YouTubes. That's when we have multiples of them. We've talked about this before as well. As an industry, when we design things well, and we talk about when we design for somebody with a disability, we usually make improvements that end up benefiting everyone. We've talked about that for many years. But the tone of this one is even interesting to me because if you look at the words that we're actually using in the title, how designing for disabled people is giving Google an edge. There's a very different tone that we hear now when we're reading headlines, when we're working in the industry. There's a very different tone. And it's not about designing for people with disabilities. It's about designing with people with disabilities. And that's part of the kind of resurgence or new interest in inclusive design, right? An inclusive design or an inclusive design process can involve many different things. But one of the things that we should try to avoid, if we can, is try to avoid designing for people with disabilities. Let's try designing with people with disabilities. And that actually sets a good tone for inclusion. So there's different levels of designing with people with disabilities. And I would even take it a step further and say, not just designing with, but designing by, right? How can we get to the point where we are having the designs co-created or co-designed by people with disabilities, right? We need to engage in a process where people with different disabilities are fully enabled and able to participate in the process. And I'll give you an example. We work with teams to do process and tool inventories. And one of the process inventories that we're constantly going through with design teams, right, at early stages, because I would love for inclusion and accessibility to be right up front, right from the get-go. So we work with design teams and we go through their process. And one of the things that everybody does, like I can't think of a company that we have worked with over the last 5 years where the design team doesn't do some kind of either whiteboarding or massive like post-it note consumption type activity, right? Write all these things down on a post-it. Let's organize these. They're very typical and common in the design world is to do things like affinity diagrams where we're writing everything out there. We're going to collect these in clusters and groups, or we're doing card sorting, or we're doing whatever. These are all very visual processes. And the very first thing that we do, as soon as we get to the point where we've got all the final post-its in the right spots on the whiteboard or wherever it is, or on the wall, we pull out a camera, you don't pull out a camera. We pull out our phone and has a camera on it, and we take a photo of it, and we post it to the team in Slack, or we post it to the team in Basecamp, or we post it to the team in Jira, or whatever we're doing, and it's not an accessible thing because it does nothing, excuse me, it does nothing to represent the detail that's in there. But it's one of the very first things that we do. We work with teams and we think about whiteboarding. And we get people up and we're whiteboarding and we're ideating and we're doing all of these designery things. And we don't have a mechanism. And there's like, I'll give you this little vignette here of a workshop that we did. We did a workshop at CSUN many years ago. And we were going through the process of planning for it. And we knew we had, there was no whiteboards, but we thought, okay, well, if there's no whiteboards, what can we do? We'll put up some big poster or butcher block paper on the walls. And then we looked through, we went through and did an inventory of that particular activity, and we mapped it to all the different types of disabilities that we knew were represented in the room, in our group. And we looked at it and we knew that there were 3 people that were either in a wheelchair or on a mobility scooter. And we thought, if we put that butcher block paper up on the wall, somebody that's in a wheelchair or on a scooter will not actively be able to participate in the same way as people that are able to stand and reach the top of the butcher block paper. I'm like, crap, that won't work. So we had to let's start over. So we took the butcher block paper, and instead of saying, here's butcher block paper all over the room, go write it up there, and anybody that's in a wheelchair or in a scooter, we've put one on a table for you so that you can get to it. We just put them on tables all the way around the room, right? And that very, very subtle difference in the message that we were sending is, this is a way that everybody gets to participate on equal terms, right? Everybody's at a table. There's not a whole bunch of people up at the wall that are standing and writing, and then another group of people that are there, right? By the same token, people designers, I did a design workshop last week, and people love the easels, like the easels for sketching and stuff. Totally into it, totally fine. We had basically created an activity where we wanted people to create a big grid. And so what we did was we gave everybody the option. We knew that if there were people in the audience that could not interact with the easel, right? Maybe they maybe they couldn't see the easel, or maybe they had mobility challenges or dexterity challenges, and writing on an easel might be a challenge for them or difficult. So we set it right from the beginning. Use the easel or use this shared Google Sheet that we have that's available. And both were used in that workshop. So it was like everybody got the option. We didn't even mention anything about disability at all. But somebody that needed the digital version, they could go right in, and they had it was an accessible, very simple, straightforward Google Sheet. So there was not really any massive accessibility issues. I'm being careful what I say because I can't speak for Google and Google Sheets accessibility. But generally speaking, exactly, it's pretty good. Ray agrees. So, but we had mechanisms where everybody could choose and everybody could participate. And those small little changes in tone and the way that we approach things is like how designing for disabled people is giving Google an edge. That is old language, right? So we're now focused on designing with and designing by. And that subtle change is a thing that actually carries quite a bit of weight and meaning. Because if I'm designing for someone with a disability, that's just me doing it for them, right? But it's more inclusive to make it designed with and designed by. And that's the direction we want to go. Now, I know that it can't always happen, right? One thing that we do take a little bit of solace in is knowing that the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, as they've been built up over the years, 99, 2008, 2018, and all the work that happened before that, all the work that has gone into that, into codifying and standardizing and saying these are the guidelines that we have, that is all based on working with people with disabilities and understanding what their needs were. So if you're using that checklist, now it doesn't represent all of it, but if you're using that as your guide, that is still based on real experience with people with disabilities, having, facing barriers and needing to find ways around those, or let's make this better so that those barriers aren't there. So there's different levels of inclusion and inclusive design that we'll talk about, but very quickly, the highest level and the best way to do it is like people with disabilities participating in a meaningful and equitable way in the entire design process. Make sense? Kind of one notch down below that is we do usability testing with people with disabilities, right? That is better than what most people are doing now, which is not doing any usability testing with people with disabilities. But at its very highest level, like that level, just doing usability testing with people with disabilities, that is like a summative and an evaluative activity, right? When we talk about doing user research and UX work, we also need like the generative stuff. So let's actually talk with people at the beginning, people with different disabilities, and involve them and have them participate in the design activity, in the ideas with us, in the concept stage, in all of that work. Because some of the team, and I know, a few people in here, and I know that some of the work that people in here have done with, an aging population, for example, has been really, really useful at generating new ideas and new ways of solving the problem that we wouldn't have known if we hadn't actually had that population very engaged in the process. All making sense still? So at the top level, people with disabilities engaged and participating, co-designing all the way along. That's like, for now, that's like the ultimate lofty but totally doable goal. A level down, like not involved in everything, but involved in as many phases as possible. And at a very bare minimum, usability testing with people with disabilities. And that might not be just at the end. Hopefully that's like in multiple places all the way along. If we think about iterative design, as I'm drawing circles with my hand here to kind of show iterate. This is the universal sign for iteration, right? Yes, and I did. So in these iterations, we're hopefully doing some form of usability testing all the way along, and we're using that to make the next iteration better, and the next one, and the next one. So that's like a next level. The I was going to use a word can't here, but I don't really like that word. But I was going to say, if you can't do those things, and can't is a very strong word, it's not necessarily accurate, but one of the things that I would say we need to do better at is more inclusive design thinking. And that's what a lot of the activities and the inclusive design toolkits out there help you with. They help you think in new ways about things. That is still very much, though, a projection and conjecture on your part as to what somebody with a disability might, might experience in this. So, and it's not that that's wrong, but it's it's kind of like different levels of fidelity in terms of what the experience actually is. So it's conjecture, right? Doesn't mean it's wrong. You could be very right, but we still need to validate those assumptions as we're moving forward. Like, okay, we had these assumptions that we built into this. Now let's actually test those assumptions. And that's the critical piece. If you're going to just practice inclusive design thinking, we still need to get to the point where we're actually validating that the things that we were making those assumptions about are correct. I want to keep going in here some of these other things that we've seen, because in the last year, in the last few months even, in 2018, we have seen a lot more, I don't want to say press, but there's been a lot more press and coverage in the media about what people are doing in terms of inclusive design. This article was the first of 3 on the Adobe blog by a friend of mine, Matt May. And Matt really kind of gets into this. Matt is like, inclusion is now his thing at Adobe. He used to be on the accessibility team. He is now like leading inclusion at Adobe. Matt is, hi Matt, if you're watching. But Matt started with this series of 3 articles, and they're great. They're on the Adobe blog, and he really breaks down and talks about accessibility, universality, and inclusion in design, and how he sees all of those things, how he sees those fit together. Other things that we're seeing, Kat Holmes. So Kat used to work at Microsoft. Brilliant thinking and implementation in terms of inclusive design. Instrumental. It wasn't just her. There was a team that was doing this stuff as part of the Microsoft design team. But one of the things that she has done was created this, I say she, there was a group of people, but she contributed to this, Microsoft's Inclusive Design Kit. They have a really wonderful inclusive design kit. And Kat has written this article about, what you're getting wrong about inclusive design. And that was in a newer iteration of the co-design publication. So that's from, I believe, April, January, February, March, April of this year. This is the inclusive design toolkit. If you go and look at Microsoft.com/inclusive design and inclusion, I think there's a bunch of different URLs that all point to the same place. But if you look at inclusive design at Microsoft, they have just some really wonderful learning principles in there, but also tools that you can actually use to help create more inclusive thinking. Right? And that more inclusive design thinking is a critical piece. We all need to do that. We all need to take some of those other steps as well. I don't know if you saw this news item this year. This is a friend of mine, Bryce, who works on the Xbox team and is really focused on inclusive design and accessibility for gaming. And one of the things that he kind of launched, or was really finally excited to talk about on Global Accessibility Awareness Day, was the Xbox Adaptive Controller. It is a brilliant piece of design work. And one of the things that I love most about it, there was a little video that came out afterwards. Like the controller itself is pretty impressive, and there's a lot of really interesting accessibility features. But one of the really cool things that they did, they released a video afterwards that was all about their accessible packaging, because they knew that some of the people that needed that adaptive controller might actually have some significant challenges trying to get it out of the packaging in the first place. I have issues with getting things out of packaging, and I like to think that my hands mostly work. Right? So they created an entire little video about what it meant to create and to design accessible packaging. So this is all part of like kind of this groundswell of new ideas in terms of where we're going in this industry. Another tool that I found earlier this year, created by Airbnb and one of their partners, with News Deeply. It's a journalism startup, and they created this little kind of dedicated little microsite called Another Lens, and it's not about inclusion of people with disabilities specifically. It's really about inclusion in general. And the website is really quite interesting. They've got a bunch of little cards that kind of help you get outside of your own head and consider other things. And so their three kind of underlying principles are balance your bias, consider the opposite, and embrace a growth mindset. So yeah, I think it's at airbnb.design/anotherlens. Don't quote me on that. It might not be quite right, but we'll tweet it out afterwards. A wonderful tool just to get you thinking in different ways about the design problem that you're trying to solve. So there's lots of really wonderful things happening, including this, where August has recently left Pinterest. August de los Reyes, the guy I was showing you before, who's really making it a thing. He is going around and changing Silicon Valley right now in terms of what what people understand. I remember talking with him a little bit about Pinterest, and there's some interesting challenges with Pinterest. There's a lot of challenges there. Like let's not even go down all of the different diversity and inclusion paths there. But one of the things that was an interesting challenge is that Pinterest is kind of known as the social media platform that is the most visual. Like it is all visual. In fact, when you do searches and things, you can say, find me images that are similar to this one, right? To that extent, that's how ingrained the visual experience is. And what they ended up doing was redesigning Pinterest and reimagined it completely so that it's now more accessible for people that happen to be blind. Now, that's not every disability, but it's definitely one of them, and one of the most challenging for something that is considered to be such a visual medium. If they are doing this and saying, and I'm sure they are not, I'm sure they're not perfect. None of us is. But if they can do that for something that is touted as the most visual social media platform out there, what can we do? Like that's pretty damn impressive. For them to even go out there and publicly say, we're doing this. And that's the thing that I think has changed a lot between last year at this time and this year, is that there's a lot of organizations that are seeing this broadening of diversity and inclusion, and some of them are including people with disabilities in that. And they are doing some really incredible things. This is all really important, and I can't remember if I've shared this here before or not, but I'm going to share this again. This is a tweet. You can see a photo here of 6 oranges that are pre-peeled and are in plastic containers on a shelf at Whole Foods. And the tweet that goes with it, if only nature would find a way to cover these oranges so we didn't need to waste so much plastic on them. Now, I found this interesting because it received like hundreds of, like 100,000 plus retweets and likes, because of course it's like somebody's being like cynical and funny, and it's actually pretty interesting to see the conversation that ensues after this. And by conversation I mean arguing, because it's the internet and somebody else was wrong. So ultimately it goes around and around, and people start to come forward and say, I've got really severe arthritis. I can't peel an orange. So this is awesome for me, right? And other people like, oh, my grandfather. I didn't say this in the Twitter battle or anything like that, but my grandfather in the mid-1980s had a stroke, couldn't use his left hand ever again. There's no way he could peel an orange, right? Now, there's other ways of solving that problem. Like he could have got my grandmother to peel the orange, and that's what he would have done. I don't even think my grandfather liked oranges, now that I think about it. But if he did, he could have had my grandmother do it. But one of the things that I always look at is like, what's a higher principle here than just, not just accessibility, but independence. If I want to be independent, I should be able to be independent. So for him, asking my grandmother to peel the orange, not that that might be a big thing, but that might be like a small hit to his independence that he doesn't really want to have. So it's interesting to watch this conversation unfold. And one of the people actually comes back into the conversation. And I think this person, I believe this person had a disability herself. And she said, I mean, accessibility is nice and all, but you know that that wasn't the thinking behind this product. It wasn't designed for disabled people. This is what we call accidentally accessible. It just happens to be accessible. We didn't do it in a methodical way. We didn't get there on purpose. It just kind of happened. Now, I look at inclusive design as being a thing, an action, or a series of actions of intent, right? It's an intentional facilitation and crafting of an experience, and all those interactions within an ecosystem, whatever that ecosystem is, that incorporates inclusion as a core value. I come back to this time and time again, and I love the intention part. I love the craft part of it. I love the ecosystem. I have a biology degree. I used to be a biology teacher. And so like ecosystem speaks a lot to me about the interconnectedness of things. The most important phrase in here for me, though, is the two words at the end, the core value. If inclusion is a core value, it means that we cannot and will not compromise and deprioritize that. Because in the world that we live in, or that most of us live in, I'm making some assumptions here, so I may be wrong if this is not what it's like for you. But in the world that I live in and work in, when we say we'll do that later, that really means we're not going to do it, right? We deprioritize things. It means if we're able to deprioritize something, it means it's not a core value. So when we hold this up and say inclusion is a core value of what we do, accessibility as an outcome is a core value of what we do, we don't let it get pushed aside. The organization shouldn't let it get pushed aside, right? Now, of course, to make this work, everybody has to believe that, right? That's why the broader diversity and inclusion initiatives are actually very useful to us, because many corporate social responsibility people, like that's a thing, but people that are in positions where they're like, we're in charge of corporate social responsibility programs at our company, at our organization, they believe this stuff, and they get the entire company to believe this stuff. And so that now makes it a very easy thing for us to, like, you know, put the vegetables in the lasagna, right? Nobody even knows they're there, but it's there, right? We work it in because the company or the organization values inclusion and diversity as a whole. And this is one aspect of that. This is the way that I look at inclusive UX design. And I was just speaking at an event apart in Chicago, over there, somewhere over there. And I gave this talk this afternoon, and this is like just one little snippet. And that talk is, it's called Inclusive UX Techniques for Everyone. And this is one of the techniques that we use for teams, and there's techniques for designers, for developers, but this is specifically for teams. One of them is communication and making sure that the things we're doing are much better. This one, though, I think is most important because it illustrates the importance of doing this well. We actually have to practice inclusive design as we've talked about it here, and that means at a bare minimum, doing usability testing with people with disabilities. One of the reasons for that I think this is really important, is that when we do that, we get ahead of the curve. And I'm going to tell you what I think that means. We went through WCAG 1, came in 1999, WCAG 2, 2008, 2.1, 2018. That's a lot of time in there. In 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, 16, 17, 18, we do usability testing with people with different disabilities. And we see things that we get pushback on. People come to us and we say, we do this, we go through, we do the UX review, we do that, and then we do usability testing. We create this composite overview of here's how things are. This is where people are struggling right now. This is some of the issues that you need to deal with. And we will log all these usability issues that we found with people with disabilities. And here's what people say to us. That's not in the checklist. It's not part of WCAG. That's a nice to have because we don't need to do it. It's not in the checklist. Part of the problem is 99, 2008, 2018. That's like the world's slowest release cycle ever, right? Now, there's a ton of work that went into that. But that time passing, 10 years basically between iterations, means that the world perceives it as a fixed thing because it didn't change very frequently. This is a fixed thing. But if we look at any computer language, look at PHP, look at JavaScript, look at whatever, look at versions, look at React, look at Angular, new versions coming all the time. It is not a fixed thing. It is constantly changing. And everybody seems really, really comfortable with that. But the minute that we say, by the way, accessibility and our accessibility standards should be changing regularly as well to take into account the new things that we've learned, people are like, whoa, 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 whoa. Accessibility doesn't change. But it does. So the things that we saw in usability testing, and I'm not saying like everything that we found was a thing that's represented here, but we would find things in usability testing and get pushback, and people would say, that's not on the list. We don't have to do it. Well, now some of those things are on the list because 2.1 brought a whole bunch of new things in, things that we had been seeing in usability testing and recommending to clients for years. So when we look at usability testing and those results with people with different disabilities, the things that we saw or that people saw as nice to have before, that's actually tomorrow's accessibility standard. Right? So if we do usability testing today, we're going to find things, usability testing with people with a variety of different disabilities. We will find things that are not represented in WCAG, not even in 2.1. And people will look at us and say, we don't need to do that because it's not in the list. But it may be there next year. Why wouldn't we start recommending that they do that anyway? It may be there the year after that or the year after that. We don't know how much shorter the cycle, the release cycle is for WCAG 2. Whatever or whatever the next version is. We don't really know what that is yet. But we should anticipate like, hey, this might actually go with like an 18-month release cycle. That would be really cool, actually. I would love that. Because that really sends a message. This stuff changes as we learn more. I'll give you three examples. WCAG 2.1, 1.4.11, non-text contrast. Rules for contrast used to only apply to text, effectively, just to text. And we would do usability testing with different systems and different people. And I remember doing some work with airlines. And this, it's tough here because it illustrates the point reasonably well. Unless you're in a perfect spot to see this, this is a large grid of fares, right, for taking a flight from one place to another. And it's very difficult to see these low contrast radio buttons that are in there. When we did this testing, so you can see like, I don't know how many rows there were, but there's like 50 rows of flights, about 5 or 6 columns because they're all different price points. When we did usability testing with these, and these are custom radio buttons, custom designed, but very low contrast. They're not left to be operating system level radio buttons. They're a very specific light gray outline radio button. That's because branding, right? When we did this testing with people with low vision, they looked at this grid and they didn't know what to do because they couldn't see that there was radio buttons. They thought it was just a big table of fares. Like, cool, What do I do now? There's no affordance in there, really. It's like there's almost no visual that says this thing is a radio button. It's there, but it's really tough to see. We pushed back and said, hey, you've got a contrast issue here. They said, nope. Well, they knew they had a contrast issue, but it wasn't on the list because that's not text. I'm like, I'll argue this like 100, like over and over and over again. There is zero difference between that radio button and a big fat letter O. And if I can't read the letter O, and I can't read that, then I can't read that radio button, right? There's zero difference there. I even got into the point where I was like, listen, do you even know what a radio button symbol is? Like I went back to the mathematical things, like the mathematical symbols that radio buttons actually come from, which show exclusive selection and that kind of thing. I'm like, this is just a representation of that character, and damn it, that's just text, right? Didn't have to go quite as deeply as I went, maybe, but ultimately, this was a discussion that we had to have, and now that is part of WCAG. Non-text contrast. It needs to be there. It used to just apply to text, and so people would look at icons and they'd be like, oh, well, it doesn't apply to that icon. I'm like, that icon means something. If there's not enough contrast there, that meaning is going to be lost. And so we went with that, right? Still argued it. You know, the difference between, and I'm thinking of like, we did a lot of work with airlines in the last few years. So a plane that is taking off versus a plane that is landing, that has meaning, right?
Yeah.
That has meaning. And so that's a case where that icon needs to have enough contrast, even though it's not a piece of text. So that was a battle that we used to have, and now it's kind of like it's actually in there now. Now it's a requirement. We told you so. Question?
I'm sorry, but talking about simple adjustment in CSS.
Oh, I'm not.
Was it a pushback from the style guide, the visual standard, or just people just don't understand it? It's just a quick update on CSS.
So the question is, you know, what's up with that? It's a simple update to the CSS. What kind of pushback was it? It was pushback in a lot of different ways. Part of it was like, it wasn't about the mechanics of doing it. It was about, we've got this approved brand, and this is the design that was signed off. And so now it's going to take political clout to get somebody to sign off. And I'm saying, because that's not just a color that's used here, it's used everywhere, right? And this is the manifestation of that. So it's a lot of different things. Yeah.
So this would be an argument up front, the graphic designers.
Absolutely.
Aesthetics, let them do
Yeah.
a quick little high contrast reality.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's definitely about doing more things up front. I have two more examples I'll share. And then we've got the second half. I don't even know what time it is. What time is it? 7? Okay. I'm gonna stop talking soon. I'm gonna go through these examples, but then the second half of this is like, let's ask like Q&A. I love doing Q&A. So I want to give you like this chunk, and then we'll do Q&A for everything. So another one in WCAG 2.1 is character key shortcuts, 2.1.4. This is a thing that we knew from doing usability testing and understanding that there are keyboard conflicts. People are mapping keys all the time now, things like in Gmail, right? J and K navigation, like total nerd stuff, right? Like JK navigation being built into apps is a total nerd thing to do. And that, I mean that in a good way. Like that's like super power user. But those keys might interfere with for their Smith or assistive technology, whatever that may be. Right? And so ultimately, the guidance that we have around this now, and we've been kind of mentioning this to people for a while. And I remember when Google first implemented this, they have these keyboard shortcuts. There is a lab extension that you can build into Gmail that allows you to override. So if there's a keystroke that you want to use for something and it's already mapped for your stuff, like for your tools that you're using, you need to be able to override it. And so Gmail provides this. Now, it's not a setting that's there by default. It's a lab setting that you need to enable, but it's still there. This is the for a screen reader user either. But that's another thing to keep in mind. So that's what the label in name comes from. And we have seen that in usability testing before, where people have struggled. And it's not just that it doesn't work with Dragon, right? So Dragon is going to read through that page. When you make say, click flip, it's going to look for the word flip anywhere in that page. It didn't find any. Now the person that's using Dragon needs to kind of switch their strategies a little, and they're like, okay, just click link, and they hope that it's a link, and then they'll choose from that one. But now instead of choosing from 4, they're choosing from the 35 links that are on the page, right? Choosing from 4 is better than choosing from 35. So hopefully that idea makes sense to you. Label and name. That's not the only implementation or sort of interpretation of it, but that's an example. That stuff is now in WCAG, and it wasn't there before. So I think what's happened over the last year, and what I've kind of observed the teams that we've worked with, and just sort of in general, the definition of inclusive design is broadening, but we're also getting to the point where hopefully people's understanding of accessibility is kind of moving away from this is a fixed thing and it shall never change. And understanding that just like languages change, just like new technologies change, like we're, React version X and now X+1 or whatever it is, accessibility has kind of versions that represent this is the best understanding that we have right now. But we're going to keep learning. We have to keep learning. This is not a fixed thing in time. As we're doing things now with more speech-based interfaces, we have new accessibility requirements that are coming in. In WCAG 2.1, there's a whole lot of things that have to do with mobile, like touch screen interactions and things with accelerometers where, if you do something and you turn your phone, that shouldn't lock you out of some particular functionality because some people might need to have their phone in landscape mode all the time instead of portrait mode, right? So if you think of, does anybody on Instagram and use so Instagram TV, their new feature, right? And it is designed to be vertical only. And this is pure conjecture, but I do know people that can't hold their phone upright. They actually have to hold it sideways in landscape mode. So what does that mean for them in terms of Instagram TV? It means they're going to have every single one of their videos is sideways for them, right? Is that okay? I don't think so, but I also don't think that anybody's really thought of that kind of thing, right? And that's an orientation-based kind of cue. So I hope all of that makes sense. This is kind of like that ultimate lesson. The best way to do this is to design with people with disabilities, not for them. That's kind of the underlying message, and I hope that I think I've said that enough times that you should be able to walk away with that. I don't think I have any more slides. Oh, maybe I do. Oh yeah, this is another thing. I'm gonna say that
Until 7:30.
I have to. What time is it now? 7:08. It's not 7:30, so we're good. I'll show this last one to you because this is a thing that comes up often. We need to be more creative as designers too, and we should encourage our design teams to be more creative. Which, carousels are bad for a lot of different reasons. One of them is that it might be very challenging for somebody that has mobility challenges to operate that carousel. Maybe somebody that can still operate a touch screen, but a swipe activity maybe, or a swipe gesture might be hard. So one of the things that we often look to do is instead of putting things in carousels, we put them in carousels to save space, right? That's all it is. We're going to save space. We're going to give some scrolling things and allow you to move through multiple pages rather than taking up all that space. Some people don't really care about things taking up space if it's easier for them to use. So at the design level, we should start identifying things like this. Like when you see a carousel, right? We see things like this all the time, right? Here's two carousel arrows, a left and a right with three little things in between. But one of the things that we should consider doing is offering the ability to change that carousel into a straight up list, right? Just build that into the interface. Tap a little button or make a change in preferences or whatever it is. I would be a total fan of some kind of like flag that goes at the operating system level, like never show me a carousel again, just show me a list of all the stuff, right? And maybe it's not a list. Maybe instead of a list, it's a grid, right? Show me a 3x3 grid, right? So I've got the exact same design for each one of those little cards in the carousel, but I just display it in a grid instead. This is like a design problem that we can solve, and we can start pushing people towards that kind of thing, provide that kind of functionality in the interface. Like maybe you have a thing in here where if you use a certain gesture on a carousel, it actually expands the carousel out and turns it into a list, right? So that it's something that's built into the interface that allows somebody to easily change it. Because I know for me, if I want to tap on the last one of the 9, I don't want to have to go through 2 pages, swipe over or tap on the carousel thing over. I would rather it just be there from the beginning so that I can select it. So that's some of the thinking that we need. And we don't come up with ideas like this as readily as we do when we're actually engaging and having people with disabilities participate in the process to design this stuff with us. Last thing, and then we're going to just go to questions. I'm a big believer in this. Accessibility is an outcome. It's a measure of how well we have achieved that outcome. Inclusive design is a process that we use to get us there. Inclusive design, if we do it well, that gets us there predictably, repeatedly, sustainably, in a methodical way. So that's kind of where I want to kind of conclude things. I don't know if that's a good, I'm going to leave that up there, and let's go to take as many questions as we can in the time that we have.
Sure. Let me grab that for a second.
You want the streaming mic?
Actually, the other one.
The other one?
Yeah.
Oh, because you want to talk.
I want to talk.
Oh, I don't want you to talk, though.
Actually, no, I take that back. Just turn yours off.
Oh, just turn. How do I do that?
You can't have them both on at the same time.
Okay.
Something about our heads.
Oh, okay.
So we're going to go to questions. I have a favor. I'm presently captioning videos from past meetups, and one pattern that I've seen with questions is many people will out loud, audibly, it is, and then when the speaker, Derek, tries to repeat it, it's next to impossible. What you're going to do is to think about your question first, then let us know what that question is, and hopefully it's nice and concise so Derek can repeat it. We have the first question over here, and then we have one from the YouTube stream.
Yeah, Derek, carousels, we all know they're bad. The question though is, how do you introduce new design patterns and have people at masses know how to actually use them?
So great. Did I turn myself off there? Am I on? How are we going to do this?
Sorry, it's back to this.
Okay. Am I on? Is this thing on? Is it on? What about now? Should we just use that? I'll do that. Let me take this one off. Thank you. Check. I totally forget your question already now. Carousels. How do we introduce new design patterns and have people know how to use them? So I'm a big believer that when we introduce a new pattern, we need to teach people how to do it. And so I like to think of building things that teach people how to use it into the interface. So the first time they use it, there's extra clues there. Extra clues, and I'm trying to think of, okay, let's say we built something into the carousel that there was another little call to action that was visible there that was like, maybe I'm going to make this up. In the bottom right-hand corner, there's a plus sign. And that plus sign means that it's going to make that bigger. I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but I'll use that just for conjecture. So the first thing is, when you're doing that, we've got to introduce that in a small way. We've got to test that somewhere first. We've got to prototype that. We've got to try it out with real people and see if they get it. I would try it out a whole bunch of times and iterate on it there before we ever release it to into production or anything. So I wouldn't go through that. I think that's the whole purpose of iteration. I would use it that way, and I would include people with disabilities in that prototyping phase, get that out there, and then I would introduce it slowly, and then use, a lot of people do those onboarding things. That can be done in a reasonably accessible way as well, saying, hey, look for this thing. This is a new way to do this. Then you get that feedback in production. You might scrap it all, right? It might be a really bad idea. The plus symbol may be completely silly. But I know we saw in a lot of our financial clients, they have graphs of things, and they introduced a table toggle, basically where you could say, show the table or not show the table. And so they have a graph there, and you could do it one of two ways. You could turn the table of data to go on, or you could have it off, which is off by default. You could have it on and show the table instead of the chart, or you could show the table and the chart together. And that simple little thing I say simple, it wasn't super simple to do, but that little tiny change was something that was very easy for people to understand what it was. So I think that's kind of the way that we have to approach it. Test the idea out, see if people even understand what it means. Like maybe it's a plus, or maybe it's an arrow, or maybe it's something else. We got to go through those iterations to be able to do it. And I would include people with disabilities in that process as well. I don't know if that completely avoided answering. If it did, I'm okay with it. But also if it answered your question, I'm okay with it too. Next.
Actually, the next question is going to be from online, and then Ray will get your question. Mary Brown from the live stream asks, I work at an agency and often partner with clients with relatively small niche user bases. Do you have recommendations about how to recruit people with disabilities for user testing?
Yes. So I'm trying to think of an example of a really small niche. In Canada, we say niche, but down here, I think we say niche. A really niche user database. So my idea would always be like, go to people that are your potential clients, even if they're not your actual real clients, because you may have no clients that have disabilities in that user database. I like to go to colleges and universities because they almost always have centers for students with people with disabilities, or centers for students with disabilities, and recruit people from there. That's like a wonderful source of people. If that doesn't match with kind of the potential user base, that's another good question. I would say that's why I was sort of saying, even if you don't have any clients that currently have disabilities or people in that database that currently have disabilities, that's why I would go beyond that and look for like people that are similar in terms of the needs, and look for those same people, but people with disabilities. So that might be still sourced from the same place. That's where we go almost all the time. I don't know if that helps, but let Mary let us know if that helps. If it doesn't, then ping me and we can talk about it some more.
Good. I think
Ray, you're up. Let me get you the mic.
All right.
There you go.
So one of the strategies at the place that I work at, one of the things I'm trying to push back on, I'd like some ideas from you on how to more successfully do it, is people will say, well, I work in an industry where web accessibility is mandated, but mobile app accessibility is not. And I also work in, and they're still mandated only to go to 2.0. So my question is this: what I have been trying to say to folks at the company I work for is, you're already. Let me get into my question. How do I more successfully push back on and say, look, just because it's not mandated, it's still the right thing and the responsible thing to do. And plus, you're going to be using a lot of code anyway. So how can I more successfully push back? Because I'm really having a lot of trouble getting folks to buy in.
Thanks, Ray. That's an awesome question. I would say a couple of things, just kind of, right off the bat. The Department of Transportation, not that I know where you work or anything, but the Department of Transportation, when they made these regulations and said it's not going to apply to mobile, right? And we're at 2.0. That I totally get the 2.0. That's a battle that everybody has to fight. My take on that is we should be pushing that, and I think the changing nature of it, if we get to shorter release cycles, and if we anticipate those shorter release cycles, and we talk about those things as being changes that come to the guidelines based on real people's experiences, that starts to carry a bit more weight than just, this is a list from the outside that doesn't have, you know, anything to do with our customers. On the other side of it, in terms of the mobile app side, and I'm not a huge fan of the fact that you know, you don't need to make mobile apps accessible in that industry. The reality is, you probably have the data. How am I going to word this? You probably have the data already that shows X percentage of transactions in that industry are already happening on mobile apps anyway, right? That's measured somewhere, and I would use that to leverage that as much as you can. Almost, you know, there are clients that we've talked with in the last, say, 3 years that haven't, you know, they haven't talked about a mobile first strategy. Some of them are talking about a mobile only strategy, right? Where everything is moving to mobile. Like, our website is no longer functional for you know, e-commerce or buying whatever it is. It's really all about like the corporate, like who we are as a company and how to work there. All of the transactions are happening on mobile. That's already happening. So I think you've got probably some good data there. I would push in that direction. I would also point to the stuff in that particular piece of legislation that I won't name, there's actually some really good supporting material in there, Ray, about the recommendations that the DOT made that basically say, hey, we know it doesn't apply now, and here's a whole bunch of reasons why. They list like 6 or 7 reasons why they said mobile was out. All of those reasons don't apply anymore because they're from 2011, right? So their reasoning behind it was mobile is not in because of, you know, the platform sucks, right? There's no good accessible platform on these phones that people have. Well, that's just not true anymore. There's no mobile specific guidance. That's not true anymore. There's like 5 or 6 reasons that they gave that are totally not true anymore. And they actually said in there, hey, you should start doing this now because this will make it easier in the case of future legislation changes or regulation changes. So that wording is actually in there. It's not in the legislation, but it's in all of the discussion of
competitors are doing, like not having a carousel. So how do you address that?
So I need the So the first part of your question was, you know, when it's free, we don't have to pay anything for it. We're all in. But as soon as it costs extra, you're like roadblocks. So just make it so that it doesn't cost extra. Like it just becomes like, here's the way that we do it. So we often don't do like, oh, there's an extra round of usability testing with people with disabilities. We're going to do a round of usability testing. People with disabilities were incorporated into that group. There happen to be 5 out of 10, right? Or whatever it is. So it's not an extra cost, right? there's lots of different ways, and that's just one example. I think it's all in the positioning. There's also, like, accessibility is going to cost more for certain things, but it costs more the first time. There's a scale, right? It's going to cost you more the first time, and that is exactly the same as saying, like, hey, our entire site right now is built on React. We want to move to Angular. We've never used Angular before, but we're gonna do that. We're gonna make that move. There's a learning curve there. That's gonna cost you more. It's gonna cost you more to rebuild that site in Angular. Like, it's gonna cost you, period. It's gonna cost you more because your developers have never done Angular before, right? It's the exact same thing with accessibility. It's costing more because it's like the first time that they've tried or the first time that they've done it. They don't have the skills, they don't have the knowledge. Once they get up to par in terms of having the skills and the knowledge, things change, right? The cost really gets reduced in terms of its scale. It's still there. Like, it's never going to cost absolutely nothing, but the relative weight of what it costs comes down because people now know what they're doing. So that exists regardless of what you do with technology, right? Oh, a new version of React came out. We need to upskill. We're going to move from React X to X+1. There's a learning curve there, and so it's exactly the same thing. I always try to position it that way. It's not unique to accessibility. That learning is there, and that happens across the whole thing. So I think there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can position it. I would say that's probably one of the easiest ones. Your second question I've forgotten already. Was it probably something to do with a carousel, wasn't it? What was it? So how do you convince people to make decisions that support accessibility, even if it goes against what their competitors do? So I don't know, I like to point out things and say, like, hey, just because your competitor's doing it doesn't mean that it's right. You know, and PS, their stuff is no good either. Like, you know, I think there's lots of, and I hate hating on carousels, but I also love hating on carousels at the same time. You know, if everybody's doing it, that doesn't mean that it's a good interaction. And I would, you know, this is going to go against what I kind of said in my first answer about the cost side of things. But there is kind of an R&D piece to that too. I would look at the performance of it. Like, hey, here's the carousel version. Here's this other version that we did that's more accessible. Here's what it showed us. And maybe it doesn't. Maybe it shows us that the carousel is better. And if it does, then we're going to make the most accessible carousels that we possibly can. But if there's other options that perform better, that's the kind of evidence that we try to put in front of people and say, hey, this. And if you can't do that yourself, look for people that have done similar things, or, you know, get 20 different groups together, or you know, people that all want to study kind of the same thing, and, you know, pull your make that happen. I think there's definitely ways around it, but I would look for and use data as much as you possibly can, because data usually speaks for itself.
So we'll take a few more questions. However, we need to end the stream because we've run out of time. So please give Derek a premature round of applause.